Imagine this. You're the son of one of Hollywood's greatest legends. Every red carpet, every award, every headline, your father's name is everywhere. Now picture auditioning for his movies and being rejected every single time. That's Scott Eastwood's reality. While Clint Eastwood racked up Oscars, his son parked cars, mixed drinks, and wondered if Hollywood would ever let him in. By 35, Scott was so burned out, he considered walking away from acting altogether to become a firefighter. But the real shock isn't just his career struggles, it's what happened the day he finally stood up to his father. A birth in the shadows. Scott Clinton Reeves was born March 21st, 1986, in Monterey, California. His arrival wasn't announced with headlines or even acknowledged by Clint Eastwood himself. At that time, Clint was already a household name, directing and starring in hits like Pale Rider. On the outside, he was Hollywood royalty. Behind the curtain, Scott's life began in the shadows of scandal. His mother, Jaslyn Reeves, was a flight attendant. She met Clint during the mid 1980s, and what followed was a secret 3-year affair. While Clint lived publicly with actress Sandra Locke, who believed they were exclusive, Jaslyn quietly raised Scott and later his sister Catherine far from the spotlight. The truth only came out years later during a bitter lawsuit. When Scott was born, his birth certificate didn't carry the Eastwood name. He entered the world as Scott Clinton Reeves, a quiet attempt to bury the affair. Catherine followed in 1988, but still, Clint kept his distance. Scott grew up in Carmel by the Sea, the same town Clint once served as mayor, but there was no celebrity lifestyle. While his father was cashing $15 million paychecks per film, Scott's world looked completely different. By the time he was 10, Jaslyn moved the family to Hawaii, putting thousands of miles between them and the Eastwood Empire. In Hawaii, Scott lived simply. Classmates never suspected his father was a Hollywood legend. Clint stayed out of sight, out of reach. Scott got by on his mom's salary, working construction jobs as a teenager, waiting tables, and later paying his own way through Loyola Marymount University. Fighting for a shot. Even in college, Scott refused to lean on the Eastwood name. At Loyola Marymount, he studied communications, worked long hours, and slipped into acting classes whenever he could. On every audition form, he wrote Scott Reeves. No shortcuts, no handouts. But Hollywood wasn't kind. He auditioned for nearly every one of his father's films, every single one, and got rejected each time. Even when Clint directed American Sniper, a $547 million blockbuster with 6 Oscar nominations, Scott didn't get the call. All he wanted was one chance. Clint's answer was always the same: earn it yourself. That philosophy might sound noble, but for Scott, it meant years of being invisible, stuck in low budget films, parking cars, mixing drinks, and building houses, while his father collected Academy Awards. His earliest roles barely registered. In Clint's Flags of Our Fathers, 2006, he played Private Roberto Lunsford, a blink and you miss it part credited under Scott Reeves. The anonymity was intentional. He didn't want to be seen as riding on Clint's legacy, but the cost was heavy. Without a recognizable name, without momentum, he faded into indie projects that went straight to DVD or never left tiny theaters. At home, things weren't much easier. Clint Eastwood had 8 children with 6 different women. Some, like Kyle and Allison from Clint's marriage to Maggie Johnson, grew up in wealth. Others, like Scott and Catherine, did not. Many of them didn't even meet until adulthood. Family gatherings weren't warm reunions, they were tense, awkward collisions. Resentment simmered quietly beneath the Eastwood dynasty. During his teenage years in Hawaii, Scott struggled. Anger boiled over. He was suspended from school for fighting, quick to lash out, unable to voice the deeper pain of knowing exactly who his father was, but not having him around. He couldn't explain the ache of being both important and invisible. When the family eventually returned to California in 2000, Scott enrolled at Carmel High. That's when the secret started leaking out. Some classmates treated him like royalty, others mocked him. The comparisons to Clint were everywhere. Scott even considered keeping the Reeves name forever, just to escape the shadow. Claiming his name by college, Scott had stopped hiding. He finally embraced the Eastwood name, but he still refused to rely on his father's power. He worked jobs, applied for financial aid, and chased tiny acting roles that barely paid. Then, in 2009, something shifted. Scott landed a role in Invictus, another Clint Eastwood film, but this time he wasn't Scott Reeves. He used his real name, Scott Eastwood. The movie was about proving yourself under pressure, and that mirrored his own life. At just 26, Scott made a bold gamble. He signed a contract for not one, but 3 horror films. The first was Texas Chainsaw 3D in 2011, filmed in Shreveport, Louisiana. Scott hadn't even seen the original cult classic, only the Jessica Biel remake. Still, he stepped straight into one of the most iconic franchises in horror history. It was risky, but he needed something that would stick. Then came a turning point that changed everything. In 2014, Scott joined the cast of Fury, a gritty World War II drama starring Brad Pitt, Shia LaBeouf, and John Bernthal. This wasn't a cameo. He played Sergeant Miles, the tank crew's newest soldier. For the role, Scott endured weeks of grueling military training. He operated real Sherman tanks from the 1940s, pushed through mud, exhaustion, and claustrophobic conditions. It was raw, it was physical, and it was his chance to prove he belonged. The payoff? The cast won the National Board of Review's Best Ensemble Award. For the first time, critics and audiences alike stopped calling him Clint's kid and started calling him an actor. Just a year later, in 2015, he shocked everyone by pivoting into romance. He starred in The Longest Ride, a Nicholas Sparks adaptation where he played a bull rider who falls in love. This wasn't just about pretty boy charm. Scott did his own bull riding stunts. The role earned him a nomination for Choice Movie Breakout Star. And just when Hollywood thought it had him figured out, Scott flipped the script again, stepping into one of the most unexpected roles of his career: risk, romance, and tragedy. In 2015, Scott Eastwood shocked Hollywood. Instead of chasing another gritty role, he appeared as the romantic lead in Taylor Swift's Wildest Dreams music video. This wasn't just a cameo. It was a full-blown cinematic romance set in a dreamy 1950s African landscape, directed by Joseph Kahn. Scott played Swift's on-screen lover, complete with steamy kisses, long glances, and sweeping desert backdrops. The reaction? Explosive. Within hours of its MTV VMA premiere, the video racked up millions of views. But behind the buzz came warnings. Industry voices told Scott it was a mistake, that it could kill his credibility as a serious actor. He ignored them. For him, it was about taking risks, staying unpredictable. And in a twist, every dollar earned from the video went to wildlife conservation. Just as his star seemed to be rising, tragedy struck. In 2014, Scott had quietly begun dating Jewel Brangman, a 26-year-old model and gymnastics coach. She was young, vibrant, and full of life. But one ordinary afternoon on a drive from San Diego to Los Angeles, everything changed. Jewel was driving a 2001 Honda Civic when she rear-ended another car in a minor accident. It should have been survivable. But inside her car was a hidden killer, a defective Takata airbag that had been recalled years earlier but never replaced. When the airbag deployed, it exploded. A shard of metal pierced her neck with such force it split her spine. That single piece of shrapnel ended her life instantly. Scott was devastated. He later admitted he had lost friends before, but never someone he loved like this. For years, he carried the pain silently, not even reaching out to Jewel's father. When he finally spoke about it in a 2017 GQ interview, his words revealed not just grief, but guilt. "I still haven't found the right words," he confessed. The accident became part of the largest automotive recall in U.S. history, but for Scott, it was personal. He wasn't just mourning Jewel, he was battling survivors' guilt, shame, and the crushing weight of silence. Saved by brotherhood. Before the heartbreak, Scott had another kind of mentor, Paul Walker. The Fast and Furious star wasn't just a coworker, he was a big brother. Figure, a friend who showed Scott a way of life that would later save him. Around 2007, Paul introduced him to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. For Paul, it wasn't just a workout, it was discipline, therapy, a grounding ritual that stripped away ego. He trained under top names, even turning parts of his Hawaii home into a private dojo. By the time of his death in 2013, Paul was already a brown belt, weeks away from earning black. His instructors awarded it to him posthumously. Scott took the lesson seriously. He didn't just dabble, he embraced the grind. He rolled on the mats with strangers, got choked out, learned humility. "You'll choke some people out," he said, "and some people will choke you out no matter who you are." Fame, muscles, Hollywood last names, none of it mattered here. For Scott, who had grown up under the crushing weight of being Clint Eastwood's son, that was liberation. Jiu-jitsu gave him something rare, a space where he could fail, start over, and earn respect the hard way. And when Jewel died in 2014, that mat became his lifeline. Training wasn't just exercise anymore, it was survival. Every roll, every grapple was therapy. It kept his anger in check. It gave him discipline when grief threatened to unravel him. Joe Rogan once explained why jiu-jitsu is so powerful. It forces men to face fear and emotion without violence, to shed illusions of invincibility, and to calm the chaos inside. That's exactly what it did for Scott. In a strange way, Paul Walker saved him twice. First, by introducing him to the sport, and again by giving him the tools to survive tragedy after Paul himself was gone. Every time Scott stepped on the mat, he honored Paul. Every time he stood back up, he honored Jewel. And soon, that strength would carry him into one of the biggest franchises in the world, the one Paul Walker helped build. Rest, furious, and finally respected. In 2017, Scott Eastwood's career collided with destiny. He joined one of the most successful franchises on earth, The Fast and the Furious. His character, a sharp-suited government agent nicknamed Little Nobody, wasn't just comic relief or a background extra. The role was written to fill the void left by Paul Walker. But Scott didn't try to imitate Paul. Instead, he brought his own mix of steel, wit, and youthful intensity. The franchise had already raked in over $6 billion worldwide. For Scott, this was instant global visibility. He wasn't just Clint's son anymore. He was now part of Hollywood's loudest, fastest family. In The Fate of the Furious, 2017, Little Nobody butted heads with Vin Diesel's crew, clashed with Dwayne Johnson's Hobbs, and helped hunt down Charlize Theron's villain, Cypher. Audiences saw him hold his own alongside megastars, and it worked. But Scott didn't stop there. In 2018, he doubled down with another massive blockbuster, Pacific Rim: Uprising. This was no small indie film. It was giant robots versus giant monsters on a global scale. Scott co-led the movie as pilot Nate Lambert, standing tall through endless green screens, CGI chaos, and bruising stunt work. Critics were lukewarm, but the film still pulled in nearly $300 million. For Scott, it was proof he could carry a tentpole movie on his shoulders. Then, in 2019, he flipped expectations again. The Outpost wasn't loud or flashy. It was raw, real. Based on one of the deadliest battles of the Afghanistan War, Scott played a soldier trapped in an ambush where survival felt impossible. The film earned a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, praised by critics and veterans alike. One review said Scott sounded exactly like a young Clint Eastwood when he muttered, "No, not today." This wasn't about explosions or box office numbers. This was about craft. And for the first time, people stopped asking whether he deserved a spot in Hollywood. He had proven it. And just when fans thought his arc was done, Scott returned to Fast X in 2023, this time stepping up into a bigger role with the story hinting that his character's future was only just beginning. Passing the torch. By 2025, Scott Eastwood was no longer just Clint's kid. He was stepping into legend territory himself. That year, he starred in Alarm, a 95-minute adrenaline ride co-starring none other than Sylvester Stallone. Directed by Michael Polish and released by Lionsgate, the film followed two ex-spies forced back into chaos after a plane crash, a mysterious hard drive, and a deadly chase. For audiences, it wasn't just another action flick. It felt symbolic, a passing of the torch. Stallone brought decades of grit. Eastwood brought fire and intensity. On set, the director described their scenes together as a master class. Scott didn't just hold his own, he matched Stallone move for move. But while Hollywood was finally recognizing him, Scott was also building something outside the screen. In 2019, he launched Made Here with entrepreneur Dane Chapin. This wasn't just another celebrity clothing line, it was a mission. Their goal: revive pride in American manufacturing. The company focused on basics: t-shirt, socks, boxers, all made in U.S. factories stitched by real American workers. No outsourcing, no cheap shortcuts. It's the hardworking folks across the country that make our brand possible, Scott said. And he meant it. He wasn't just a face on the ads. He and Chapin were hands on, tweaking fits, reworking fabrics, and chasing suppliers who believed in the vision. It wasn't easy. Most of these products had been made overseas for decades, but Scott wanted to prove America could still do it and do it better. Each product came with a story, not just a label. It wasn't about chasing trends, it was about pride, dignity, and resilience. The brand soft launched in September 2019 with discounted pre orders. Behind the scenes, there were redesigns, supplier shakeups, endless trial and error. But the vision never changed. Made Here was more than clothes, it was a movement. Scott Eastwood had grown up without handouts. Now he was building something of his own, brick by brick. Hollywood gave him the stage, but Made Here gave him a legacy. Legacy beyond the shadow. Scott Eastwood once described Hollywood as a circus, and after everything audition rejections, indie films no one saw, heartbreak, global blockbusters he wasn't exaggerating. But beneath the chaos, one truth remained constant. He never wanted to be just Clint's son, he wanted to build his own legacy. Now in his late 30s, Scott admits he thinks often about the future, about family, about balance, about whether the industry that drained him for so long is really worth the sacrifice. He doesn't have kids yet, but he wants them. What keeps him up at night is the thought of being gone for months on end, chasing roles, while missing out on the life he dreams of building. And yet, every time Hollywood tempts him to quit, something pulls him back. A script worth fighting for, a role that challenges him, a story that resonates beyond the screen. Projects like The Outpost, Lucky Strike, or Regretting You remind him why he started in the first place. Still, the shadow of his father looms. Clint Eastwood is now 94, a living legend, one of the last of old Hollywood's giants. Scott knows time is short. He listens more closely than ever when his father shares stories about Sinatra, about long forgotten sets, about the kind of grit it takes to last decades in an unforgiving business. Scott also remembers the lessons that weren't told as stories, the ones taught with fists, silence, and discipline. The punch against the wall, the refusal to give him $8,000 for a truck, the endless reminders. Nothing is handed to you. Earn it. Those lessons became Scott's fuel. They shaped him into a man who could lose roles, lose love, lose faith, and still get back up. Today, when he steps onto a set, he carries all of it with him. The weight of his father's name, the sting of rejection, the scars of tragedy, the discipline of jiu-jitsu, the pride of building Made Here. Scott Eastwood's story isn't finished, but one thing is certain. He's no longer just living in his father's shadow. He's building a legacy of his own, one fight, one film, one hard-earned step at a time.